Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. E-commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome our amazing next guest, Mr. Brandon Spear from Trevipay. Welcome, Brandon.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure to have you along with me for the ride today. And we were having a little bit of technical difficulties getting you dialed into the recording today, but you're here and I'm so glad that you are.
Again, thanks for hosting me and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
No worries. Now, you're based in Kansas, aren't you? Overland Park in Kansas?
Yeah, we're based in Kansas City in Overland Park, and we have a couple of offices around the world, but this is really our center of gravity. It's here in Kansas and in Overland Park.
Love it. That does not sound like a Kansas accent, though. I got to be honest. Sounds like maybe a Safa accent going on there.
Yeah, exactly. Spotted. So most often people think I'm either from the UK or from Australia, but as you mentioned, I grew up in South Africa. I've been in the States for just over 20 years now, but having spent the first 35 years of my life in South Africa, the accent is hard to lose.
No, I'm in the same boat. Look, I grew up in Southern California, lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, of course, where there's a ton of South Africans there. So I recognized the accent immediately just because I had so many South African friends in New Zealand. But for the last 2.5 years, we've been living in Mexico. So I understand that you're almost at war with yourself from an accent perspective, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. When I'm talking to family who I still have back in South Africa, they say I sound like an American. And obviously when I'm here, most people immediately recognize that I'm not from the States.
Yeah, it's funny. It's hilarious. And I tell you, it's a funny one with the Kiwis and the Aussies too, because to most people who either haven't visited or don't live in Australia or New Zealand, but they meet a Kiwi or an Aussie overseas, they think the accent sounds virtually identical. But to a Kiwi or an Aussie, if you say that they're from the other country, they're like, no, it's definitely, if you tell an Australian, oh, are you from New Zealand? No, I'm from Australia. So there's definitely this friendly rivalry between the Kiwis and the Aussies as well.
Yep, exactly. The same thing goes for me, by the way, when people think I'm from Australia.
Yeah, I know. Oh, so good. Look, we're citizens of the world, and that's good enough for me.
Absolutely.
Listen, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you about Trevipay, what it is, what it does, how you guys came to be and what's important to you guys and your sphere of influence. But before we do that, why don't you help me better understand and my audience better understand how you even came to be in this wonderful world of fintech to begin with, specifically fintech related to commerce. What for you drew you in the CEO? You've been with Trevipay for almost 11 years now. That is not a short stint. But before that, you were with SAP. Before that, COO Quadrums. I guess you've been in tech more broadly for a very long time, but specifically fintech for nearly 11 years now. So what was the draw?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like you pointed out, I've spent most of my career in software-centric, technology-centric businesses. And prior to Trevipay, I was on the other side of the business process. So we were developing and writing procurement software for the buy side. And one of the things that really stood out to me as part of that process was the burden that a lot of that procurement software was placing on suppliers. It was quite significant, and it was everything from suppliers having to align their business processes with how the procurement software worked, but then also how to actually get paid once they had synchronized with those back office accounts payable processes. And so I was really drawn to Trevipay at the time, wanting to be on the other side of the business process and try to spend more time helping suppliers fill in the gaps and the challenges that they were dealing with trying to work with their buy side customers.
It totally resonates with me as somebody who consults specifically to the B2B e-com world or the B2B business world for manufacturers and distributors. I have a keen, empathy for all things B2B. And I tell you, when you see some of the processes that are involved with a Jagger or a Coupa or an Ariba or some of the EDI platforms that are out there on the buy side, they automate things, they streamline things, they make things a lot easier for the buyer. But certainly that moves a lot of the responsibility and the onus for integrating with those systems. It shifts all that responsibility over to the sell side. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of legacy manufacturers and distributors that are not incredibly tech savvy yet. I'm working real hard to get as many of them up to speed as we possibly can. But there's still a lot of it's very much still in the B2B world an old boys club to a degree, and therefore a lot of these B2B businesses historically have built their business on the idea of monopoly, so exclusive distributorships, things like that. And so they haven't necessarily been forced to change the way that they do business. They haven't been forced to digitalize themselves, and therefore they just don't have the chops. They don't have the practice capability internally to be able to meet their customers where they are digitally, and therefore they miss out on many opportunities. If they don't support punch out, if they don't support EDI, if they don't support e-commerce self-service, if they don't support selling through marketplaces, if they don't support these digital channels that, the likes of Forrester says that 71% of B2B buyers today in the United States are millennials or Gen Z. So the buying demographic is changing. And so therefore their expectations around a digital experience are advancing very rapidly. But yet we have a lot of old school family owned manufacturers and distributors that are maybe 25, 50, 75 years old. And they've done things the same way for so long that digital disruption for them, they don't even necessarily realize it's happening. They don't necessarily realize that they're hemorrhaging customers to competitors that are more digitally advanced than they are, simply because they're too hard to do business with for the buyer. And so I think that sounds like something you recognized, and you went, look, that's great that there's the Jaggers and the Koopas and the Arribas of the world, but we still have to get paid as a seller. And so how can we more efficiently bridge that gap, bring some digital capability, at least to the payments layer for these legacy businesses, and help get up to speed?
Yeah, you've summarized it extremely well. That's exactly the problem we're trying to help the suppliers solve. And often how we try to describe this when we're talking to somebody is to basically go through this education process that you're describing. We often refer to it as a transition that's occurring away from brand loyalty towards experience loyalty. And we just have to look in our consumer lives and see how much of our spending power is shifted to a place like Amazon, just because it's really easy to use. And so as a consequence of that overall change, which is taking longer to propagate into B2B, but it's absolutely coming. And different industries are running ahead of the curve, and some other industries are further behind. But the reality is that unless you can deal with your customers where they are, and we use that phrase a lot, unless you can meet your buyers where they are digitally, you're going to have a very difficult time competing over the long term. And the very things that you competed on in the past are not necessarily the things.
Yeah, and look, I think it does extend into payments more broadly. When we think about, well, I think about some of the B2B businesses that I've consulted to over the years, and sometimes the payment methods that are offered, even the payment terms that are offered, the credit terms that are offered, can be massive differentiators for the sellers. And I remember I was working with a wholesale fabric seller down in New Zealand. By default, they give 120-day interest-free terms to all their credit customers. So they don't discount. They don't need to discount. They sell at full wholesale rates. But what they do bring to the table is they bring effectively free finance to the table for their customers. Yep. Now, that requires them to have a certain amount of cash available to them as an asset to carry that amount of credit on the books. But what it does is it allows their customers to buy the fabric, turn it into goods, sell the goods, and then bring the cash in before they even have to pay for the raw materials of the fabric to produce the goods. And so this concept of trade credit, this concept of providing a float 30, 60, 90 days, 20th of the month following, whatever it might be, buy now, pay later, whatever you want to call it, credit terms of some description, they are part and parcel of the B2B world, but they are sometimes, especially if you're a B2B startup, it can severely impact your balance sheet if you don't have a partner that can help shoulder some of that burden and some of the risk, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the other interesting use case that we see, and I think this sounds like it's really aligned with some of the consulting work that you've done, is traditional go-to-market models, traditional distribution models are all fundamentally getting changed by e-commerce. And again, it's really just a question of time, like how long it's going to take to penetrate all of the various industries. But fundamentally, a lot of what distributors did historically is less valuable than it was because of e-commerce. And so you see a lot of manufacturers in particular really grappling with, if I bypass this distribution channel and sold directly to my end clients, I could get a pretty big margin expansion, but I actually have none of the capability necessary in-house to go from dealing with 150 distributors to dealing with 20,000 end clients. And so you end up with that sort of challenge of this is an interesting strategy, gets me closer to my clients, I get margin expansion, but I'm not ready to do it, or I can't do it, or the skills to. And a lot of the customers we serve are going through that type of transition in the industry. Some of them are leading it, some of them are trying to catch up. But it's a pretty interesting tailwind for a business like ours right now, because all of those traditional distribution models are fairly fundamentally getting changed.
And I think you point out something really important here, which is that many of these manufacturers and distributors that are going through some form of digital transformation or forced digital transformation or digital adaptation by their customers, they don't even know, unless they come from an e-commerce background or unless they come from a digital background, they don't even necessarily know that solutions like Trevipay or Hokoto or Balance or whoever else that they might want to seek a solution through for their trade credit needs, for their risk management needs, et cetera, for supplying different payment methods and all the other things that effectively B2B focused payment gateway providers provide. Unless you come from the industry, you wouldn't even necessarily know that there were solutions out there for you. You would have the natural expectation, oh, we need to carry all of this risk and all of this debt on our balance sheet. We need to own 100% of this. And if we allow 60 days worth of free credit, well, look, okay, if we do $1 million a month in sales, we'll potentially be holding a $2 million line of credit on our books, a rolling $2 million line of credit on our books at any given point in time, which for a mid-sized distributor is not insignificant. It constitutes high risk. You then have the issue of collections. You then have the issue of managing various different credit limits depending on the credit worthiness of a client as that changes over time. There's so much when we think about if we went to a traditional insurance company or we went to a traditional finance company or whatever, we would expect them to assess our ability to pay. But these businesses, to be able to do that at scale, that's not their core business. That is not their core competency. Their core competency is whatever the stuff they're selling. It is not finance. And so I guess for you guys, being able to go into some of these legacy businesses and say, we have a solution for you where we can effectively, via a simple payment gateway type of integration, we can extend trade credit on your behalf to your customers. You obviously pay us a percentage for the pleasure, but we effectively help de-risk your business and actually help you access sizes of clients that you probably wouldn't even be able to have a discussion with otherwise.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Again, if we break apart often the different pieces of the value proposition that when we talk to customers that we see, they sit in generally 2 or 3 discrete buckets. And one of them is very definitely the funding piece. But that example that I was referring to, though, if you have a manufacturer who's had a distribution channel, more often than not, they're providing some sort of trade credit terms to those distributors. So that's not necessarily their sort of biggest point. It's not the fund per se. For them, it's the other point on how do I underwrite 10,000 clients, because I have no idea how to do that. And oh, by the way, how do I do that in 17 countries? And so it becomes really complicated very quickly for those merchants, those manufacturers to think about shifting and changing their distribution model. So a big part of what our solution is really all about is that entire order to cash business cycle, which is everything from how you acquire a customer. And I want to spend a minute talking about that, how you acquire a customer all the way through the cash collection at the end. And then depending on the industry, depending on the customer, they do or don't care about the funding piece. So a lot of our clients are retailers, actually. And because of the example you used, they have very extended terms with their supply chain. They've got the 120-day terms with their suppliers. So they don't really need to get paid early. That's not what they really care about. What they care about is that they have no competence in producing an invoice. And if you're going to deal with B2B, you need to be able to produce an invoice. If you can't do that, you can't sell to a business customer.
Yes.
So it's different by industry, like where the sweet spot on the value proposition is. But one of the things I really wanted to drill into, because for the unsuspecting or unwary merchant out there, the single biggest challenge we see that we deal with, that we've had to build a real competence around, is the massive amount of business identity theft and synthetic fraud that happens when you acquire customers through a digital channel. So the minute you move away from a face-to-face channel, where you've got either a sales team or people coming into a physical location, to you're doing all of it online or all of it through e-commerce, and you're meeting your customers for the first time in that venue, So you see this massive rise in the challenge of really identity theft, business identity theft, fake companies. And that could be everything from somebody stealing the identity of a real business all the way through. We see this a lot. Fraud rings basically set up synthetic businesses that are not real, but look like they are, and apply for lines of credit. And so we see hundreds of millions of dollars of attempted fraud for the merchants we help every single year. And if you enter this space and you're not aware of this or suspecting, and you're selling a product that's easily resold on eBay or somewhere else, you better beware, because there's a lot of this attempted fraud.
And so you guys see yourselves, in some respects, you're more like an underwriter than you would be just a trade credit provider, because as you say, some of these businesses, they're self-funded in the sense that they have a strong enough balance sheet that they can, if they don't have enough cash in the bank, they can always get cheap finance somewhere at a reasonable rate to extend to their customers. And maybe it costs them a few basis points. It's no skin off their nose, but more importantly, it's the underwriting element of their business and the risk management side of their business that they don't have the core competency in. And so in that sense, do you guys see yourselves more as a competitor to an Allianz Trade, for example, versus somebody like an Okoto or a Balance or somebody else that's providing payments rails for B2Bs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of our sort of dilemmas, challenges as a business overall is we play really in three sort of discrete areas, and we have competition in three different areas. So we're not necessarily like directly head to head with any one of those examples, but we definitely overlap within the same ecosystem with them. So for a lot of our clients, the problem we're solving for them is that back office order to cash process. So that example I used of a merchant who's changing their distribution channel, they won't have the accounts receivable functions and capacity built in-house. And that's everything from how you do the underwriting to even how you deliver the invoices at scale. The example you were referring to, you have somebody on the other side that's using Ariba or one of the other ERP software vendors. They don't want to get a PDF invoice. They want this invoice delivered via XML or directly into their AP platform or directly into their ERP.
Yep.
And if you're not used to doing that, then that becomes a real burden for the merchant. And then similarly, there's a consolidation of payments that happens. One of the most challenging things in order to cash is how you actually apply cash against an invoice. So you get paid. More often than not, you're getting paid for multiple invoices at the same time. The challenge that exists.
It's a statement payment. It's not an invoice payment.
Yeah, correct. You'll get paid for 7 or 8 or 10 invoices at a single time. And what occurs then is the challenge in the industry is there isn't the same pathway for the remittance advice to flow as the payment information.
Yes.
So the payment information comes in, the remittance information comes from somewhere else. And you've got to reconnect those two things, marry them up, and then apply that against the invoices. And if you mess that up, you create all kinds of challenges that you have to unravel and do reconciliations with your customers to fix it. So there's those challenges. And then there's another key one that I want to point out. That's one of the things that's really different that we think is a problem that's not spoken about enough. If you're trying to solve this order to cash challenge, you have to make certain the invoice is correct. Most of the problems stem from the fact that there's an issue with the invoice. And that can be everything from the incorrect price on an invoice all the way through there isn't sufficient data on the invoice for the AP department to know what to do with it.
Yes. Or how to even reconcile it from their side.
No, exactly. Because they might not know which department it goes to. They might not know which purchase order it needs to belong to. A lot of the customers we have are in the automotive sector, and in those examples, fleets want the VIN number of the vehicle that's being serviced on the invoice so that they can track it as a total cost of ownership against that asset. Yep. If you don't put that VIN number on the invoice, you're not getting paid. It's not that those fleets don't want to pay you or don't have the capacity to pay you. It's just that they can't put it in the right expense bucket on their end. And until they do, the funds are not going to. So a big part of what we help the merchants do is get the invoice right, because it doesn't matter how good the rest of your business process is around collections or credit or managing risk. If the invoice is wrong, you're just not going to get paid on time. Yeah. And so a lot of what we do is actually get the invoice correct. And I've got some really cool examples if we have some time that I can share with you on how.
Yeah, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into that, but I guess one of the challenges you face as effectively a middleware provider, for lack of a better term, you're effectively a piece of middleware.
Yeah, we're bridging between these buyer and supplier systems. It's an interesting way of describing it, but we're filling in the process gaps that exist between each of them.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that I would assume, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, the thing that you occasionally might be hamstrung by, for example, is let's say one of these suppliers has a trade portal, and let's say they have a customer that logs in, they are a fleet buyer, they go and they add 20 things to their basically the fleet management software spat out a list. Okay, we need these 25 things for this service cycle. Cool. That spits out a CSV with the SKUs, etc. We upload that. We generate a PO in our system to attach to that CSV. We upload that to the portal. It populates the cart with all the items. They go to checkout, they click buy now, it gets charged to their credit account, and for all intents and purposes from the buyer and seller side, job done. Now the items just have to be shipped, and in theory, we're good as gold. But if the seller doesn't provide the opportunity for the buyer through something like a trade portal to populate the appropriate fields that are important to them with the data that is important to them for reconciliation, you're going to have gaps in the data you receive from the seller, and therefore it's going to make it almost impossible for you to do the reconciliation step, regardless of how good your technology is at mapping from buyer to seller. And so that's where I guess there must be some element of a consulting arm or something that goes into when you onboard a new seller into your system. There must be something that goes on that says, okay, cool. You've got some gaps in your sales channels in the data that you are collecting at point of sale that we need to plug those gaps. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to close the loop on this and get you guys paid quickly enough unless we close the data gap that exists today to be able to make this happen. And so I'm guessing you're advising them in some capacity to tell them, look, you got to collect more data at the point of sale. It's that simple. And if you don't do that, you're going to continue to have problems.
Yeah, so it's cool talking to somebody who really understands the industry, because that is exactly what you run into. Now, the way we solve this is we actually have those portals for those merchants. So if they don't have it, or if they have their own e-commerce platform, a Magento or whatever else, we've got all of that capability built into our APIs, and we've built plugins into those types of platforms that allow that data capture to happen so that it's occurring right then and there. We also have some cool additional capabilities around. So for example, some of our big customers in the automotive space, they send us detailed pricing files. Imagine a pricing file with 2 million SKUs times 1,000 fleets. They send us a detailed pricing file with all of their contract pricing for all of their fleet customers. And we sit in the middle, and when a transaction occurs, we actually reprice it to the correct contract price, so that we make sure that the invoice is correct. The challenge that exists in automotive is you have somebody who's making the parts to fix a truck, for example, but it's all delivered through a dealer, and they're doing the actual work. Those dealers all run on, I can tell you the number, 75 different dealer management software platforms.
Oh, yes.
Between the US and Europe, there's 75. So there's no possible way for the OEMs to keep this stuff in sync across all these different dealers. So they send it to us instead. And then as a transaction hits our network, we see it occurring. We reprice every SKU to the contract price based upon the agreement between the OEM and so that's how we get the invoice right. And we do that in different ways in different industries. I'm giving you an automotive example. We do the same thing for hotels. We do the same thing for computer manufacturers, for semiconductor manufacturers. But it's really all about back it up to where is the error going to occur? It's occur at the invoice.
Yes.
Fix that. All the downstream stuff then works so much.
But if the buyer requires, let's say they've got a unique requirement and they say, like your example, okay, cool. For every single SKU that we buy, there has to be a unique VIN attached to that line, not to that order, to that line, because there might be 50 lines and 25 lines might go against one VIN and 25 lines might go against another VIN for that specific order.
Yeah.
If there is supplementary information like that the buyer requires to be able to reconcile in AP to make sure that they send the payment correctly and reconcile it correctly, is it do you also provide a plugin, for lack of a better term, in checkout to where that, because you will have knowledge of the type of supplementary information that buyer requires in order to
Yeah.
reconcile. And so you could conditionally, you could say when this customer authenticates into a portal, for example, a buyer portal, maybe we put a piece of JavaScript in the checkout of your Magento, your Oro, your whatever it is that you're running for your B2B ecom portal. We're going to put a piece of JavaScript in there that once the customer authenticates and we recognize that customer because they're in our database, we know what they require for their AP process. And so therefore, we're going to uniquely ask them for additional information in the moment for that. It's like a segment of one, right? We know this customer requires exactly this information, and it only needs to be collected for this order because the other customers don't require this information. So then would that trigger an additional field where they can put in the additional information they require for reconciliation? And it doesn't even need to be attached to that order object for the seller in their ERP. It just needs to flow through your system so that when that invoice is actually sent out by Trevipay, it's actually got that information embedded in it.
So, Jason, we might have to give you a job in our product management group. That is exactly what we do. And we do it in one of two ways. So for very large buyers, they basically send us templates we store on our platform. And they send us those templates on whatever frequency they change. And those templates can be pretty sophisticated. So for example, some of the buyers we deal with, they won't approve an invoice unless the SKUs are in the right order. I'll give you a silly example: widget first, services second, not services first and widget second.
Yep.
It's literally got to be in the right order because that's how it's mapped in the AP platform or in their procure to pay platform. And so they don't want to deal with any of the logic of figuring it out. They just want it to map exactly like that. So they send us templates, and then we, as the data flows across our network, we reformat it and marry it to the template it needs to go to for that particular buyer. So that's the sort of use case with large buyers. With smaller buyers, we do it through a portal because more often than not, they don't have the capability of actually managing that directly or sending us the template. But we do exactly what you said. We allow them to go and effectively create the template on our portal that says, for every order like this, I need a purchase order number, or I need a project code, I need a VIN. And then that pops up whenever that transaction type is.
Wow. Yeah, look, I wasn't aware. I knew about Trevipay and I knew high level what kind of services you provided, but I didn't know, because this to me, this is so much more than just a trade credit service or a buy now pay later service. That's actually a relatively insignificant part of what you do. You are I almost see you as the grease on the wheels of the payments rails that they already exist, right? These rails already exist to be able to do wire transfers or ACH or e-check or whatever. So the payment rails themselves, like, you're not trying to reinvent the payments rails themselves. You're not trying to create some form of new payments rails. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that the buyer has absolutely no justifiable reason to not pay the seller because they don't have the information they require to do so.
That's exactly right. And by the way, that then should give you some insight with the history of where I came from. With all the procure to pay software and knowing the burden that was being placed on the supplier, why we have constructed this business in this fashion to help solve these problems for the supplier. So to give you a sense of this, Jason, to your point, only about 20% of the revenue we make comes from what I would consider like lending activities, funding. 80% of our revenue comes from all these other things that we do. And a lot of what we're doing is allowing our sellers to capture more of a larger share of wallet from their customers. Because the interesting side effect of this is, in that example I was talking to you about with the automotive customers, before our solution went in place, 1 in 2 invoices was wrong because of the synchronization problem between the contract price versus what the dealers are charging. After our solution goes into place, 1 in 1,000 invoices is wrong. So massive change. And the consequences, by the way, are as large for the buyer, because although the buyer is not paying these invoices on time, there's still this massive reconciliation issue that at some point they have to go through to say
that's liability. It's literally a liability on their books that can roll for 90 days at a time, when they actually would prefer to not have liability stacking up. They would actually like to pay it within that 30-day window or whatever the trade, they want to clear those statements monthly. They don't want a statement growing to a 90-day statement with a supplier, because the liability that ends up on their books is massive. And if they have a very large trade credit line with a supplier, let's say it's $1 million trade credit line, they can end up with $1 million liability sitting there that then they have to come up with all at once. And they definitely do not want that from a cash flow management perspective.
No, that's exactly right. And then there's also obviously all of the AP costs that end up spiraling, because you have people at the end of the day that have to get on the phone or get together in person to unravel all of these errors, like recreate the invoices, resubmit them, reprocess them. So the side effect of all of this, and comes back to why we talk about experience loyalty versus brand loyalty, is a big part of our theme of our discussion when we talk to a merchant is we say to them, if you do all of this stuff, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get a larger share of your customer's wallet. They will spend more money with you. And so trade credit you can think of as the original loyalty play.
Yes.
But if the trade credit doesn't work well, if the rest of the business process is broken, it ends up being ineffective. And that's a lot of what in the world today is that people offer trade credit, but the invoices are incorrect or all these other issues that end up coming into play. And so it doesn't deliver the loyalty element that you want, which is your customers ultimately want your customers to spend more money. So we consider our purpose is to help merchants grow. Like that is our purpose, is to help them grow by virtue of doing these things better for them. And if they need working capital, we have it. But a lot of this is about process efficiencies and being a better supplier to their customers.
And to your point, I remember when my very first pure play e-commerce business many years ago, I remember we had a couple of wholesale distribution suppliers that were supplying almost the identical, in many cases, exactly the same products. In some cases, they would have a little bit of differentiation in their products, but in many cases, they were identical. And in many cases, their pricing would be almost identical on the goods. But in some cases, the only reason I would deal with one of these suppliers was if the other supplier didn't have the goods. And the reason why I would only ever use that secondary supplier if they didn't have the goods is because that secondary supplier, everything about doing business with them was hard. Everything from finding products on their website to identifying the product, to finding out what I was going to pay for it, to adding it to the cart, to checking out, to receiving statements, to just everything to do with doing business with them was a difficult affair. There was nothing easy about doing business with them. And so they were a supplier of last resort. Not because they didn't have the products I wanted. They did have the products I wanted, and it wasn't even because their pricing was bad. It was purely because it was so hard to give them my money. It was difficult to do business with them. And I think that in many cases, many distributors are in this scenario, especially smaller distributors. Now, if you're a $400, $500, $600 million a year, $1 billion a year distributor, you, in theory, should be very easy to do business with because you have all the resources at your disposal, in theory, to be able to make that possible. But if you're small and you don't have an IT team behind you, you've got a total team of 5 people, and that's 4 field sales rep and a principal, then the reality is you probably don't have the digital chops, the technical chops. Maybe you've got a contract IT person that comes in and sets up your laptops and your security, but that's it. That might be all that you got. And so for the buyer to be able to have these ultra high integration expectations, these ultra high expectations around the way in which you supply them I remember, and this was a very recent example, there was a marketplace buyer that wanted to buy a very large, very well-known, not Amazon, very large, very well-known B2B marketplace buyer that wanted to buy off of one of my manufacturing clients. That they were a client of mine, and I was helping them through their digital transformation process. And I remember they received that this was going to be a new customer to them. They had never done business with this customer before. This marketplace customer sent them a 29-page EDI integration PDF and said, unless you integrate with us exactly this way, we will not buy off of you. It's that simple. Here's the mapping. Here's what you have to do. Here's the data sets. Here's the frequencies. Here's exactly the syntax you need to use. And they were going, this is like Greek to us. We have absolutely no idea, none whatsoever, what this document means. We have no idea. But we just know we have to do this. Otherwise, they won't buy from us. So can you help us understand this and interpret this and implement this so that we can actually sell to this massive potential customer of ours? And I run into this time and time again where these, even in some cases, what we would consider large manufacturers or large distributors that just don't have, they have internal IT chops, meaning they know their ERP inside and out. They might even know their PIM system inside and out. They might even know their WMS inside and out because that's how they fulfill things. Or they will be working with a 3PL and they know all the things that they have to get into their 3PL's hands to be able to ship goods. They might know that stuff, but when it comes to working with customers and buy-side technology, it's oftentimes, it's like a black box to them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. Those are challenges we see with a lot of what we solve for our customers today. There's one new trend, by the way, which is as painful, and that's portals, AP portals. You can't believe the portal fatigue that a lot of merchants are dealing with. We have a customer that's a sort of $100 million manufacturer. And when we took this over for them, they had 650 customer portals that they had to log into and key their invoices into. Imagine this, right? Keying the invoices into 650 different portals. They had a whole team, 30, 40 people that were doing this. And yeah, that's again, one of the things that we just take off of their plate that they don't have to deal with it. And a lot of these clients, like that's in some ways, that's even more complicated than an integration, by the way, because you end up having to solve it with robotic process automation.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you guys do RPA? Because in some instances, those portals don't have an API, then you're stuck.
They don't. There's no API. So you've got to physically like log into the screens.
As if you're a user.
As if you're a user. And then, oh, by the way, you've got challenges around managing usernames and passwords and those
security and authentication. And oh my God.
So yeah, it's a mission. But so the challenges that suppliers deal with today are much more profound than they were 10, 15.
And how are you guys starting to prepare for the agentic commerce era? Because we're already here. We're already hearing rumblings about the Jaggers, the Coupas, the Aribas of the world already working on agentic buy-side capabilities, meaning that, okay, cool. Instead of having to take a punch-out catalog down into the procurement system, search for a product, verify the price, verify the inventory, create the PO in the procurement system, and then send it over effectively like an EDI order, the buyers, they want to buy just as if the buyer and the account manager on the sell side were having a conversation. For example, okay, we're doing I don't know, I need to buy some building supplies because I'm a property developer and I've got this new job and I need all this wood, I need this, I've got the blueprints, right? I've got the blueprints for the build. And I know that on the blueprints, the quantity surveyor has listed all the items on the blueprints that we need. Okay, we need this many sheets of freaking plywood. We need this many lights. We have this whole list of items that we need, but it's not necessarily in a format that can be easily uploaded to the supplier, right? But with using agentic AI, and especially multimodal agentic AI, they don't need a perfectly formatted document. You can upload a schematic or a diagram with all the components called out in it, and that agent can formulate the request to the buyer as if it was somebody picking up the phone and talking to their account manager and saying, "Hey, Bob, this is my list. Can you put this order into the ERP for me and get it sent over to this job site?" Now we have exploded drawings, diagrams, PDFs, spreadsheets. We've got all these different ways that we can get this data into the seller's hands so that they can effectively tell us back, okay, cool, this is what we can supply. Here's your price, etc. In the agentic era, an agent is going to be talking to an agent. It's not going to be a human talking to a human. And that's what the buy-side technology is trying to solve for right now. But the sell-side technology is still a ways away from being able to respond to those requests. They'll be formatted like a human request is how they'll be formatted. It'll be plain language request. But the sell side is not ready to receive those requests electronically yet. Very few, let's put it this way. There's some that are, but very few are ready to receive that request electronically. And I can see a world where the buy side technology, for example, if they need to request a copy of an invoice, right? Instead of sending an EDI message request of some variety, asking a copy of that document ID, it's going to be a human language request agentically. It's going to be saying, "Hey, supplier X, we seem to be missing invoice number 23456. Can you pop across a copy for us and send it to this email or drop it on this SFTP server or whatever?" And those requests are going to be created agentically, and they're going to have to be sent to a technology like yours to be able to get those types of copies, for example.
Yeah, no, so that's exactly the direction we're headed in. And there's a variety of different AI approaches that we're taking in the context of customer support. that is going to be completely different in the go forward world. Now, one of the things we're particularly excited about is because we white label everything and we do stuff on behalf of our clients, you actually have to reflect the brand ethos of the customer that you are working on behalf of. That is so difficult to train in customer
Yeah.
support. It's so difficult, right? That one group is formal and one group is informal and one group is relaxed and happy. And so what we're hoping out of the agentic tools is that they're going to just really help when there's a human interaction that's required. They're going to help with that. Like, this is the tone you communicate in. This is the way these are the types of words that you use. And in the background, as the conversation is being monitored, if somebody says, I need this invoice, or I want this done, or remind me, or I'm going to make this payment next week, all the reminders are put into the different right locations inside the platform so that the person is not physically having to do it. They just really a conduit to get it to the agent who does the actual work on their behalf. The second area, by the way, which is going to have a massive impact, is in our software engineering team. So we have 220 software engineers. We're seeing a 20% performance improvement, productivity improvement from our software engineers already. We had a month last month where the agentic tools we're using wrote 100,000 lines of code that were approved by our engineers. It's remarkable, the productivity gains that are going to occur in categories like that. So we couldn't be more excited about using these tools and using them to provide a better service, do more with less, help our customers go faster.
Wow, what a super exciting time to be. I'm as excited now. I've been in this industry for 25 years, and I'm literally just as excited today to get up every day and do what I do as I was when I entered the industry 25 years ago. I couldn't be more. Yes, there's, of course, the concerns about AI ethics, and that it's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows with AI. And yes, there's probably people that will lose their jobs. And yes, there's going to be massive societal disruption. But I think that humanity has a track record of figuring stuff out. Humanity has a track record of, when tractors replaced manual plows, there was concerns that literally farmers would be a dying breed, basically. And actually, it just gave farmers superpowers. And I feel like AI used well does give people, I know for me in my life, from a productivity perspective, it gives me superpowers. And I consider myself a digital native absolutely through and through. But even for someone like me and someone who's a senior engineer on your side, if it gives them superpowers, then imagine it takes someone who might be a very average developer, moves them to a place where with AI, they're AI augmentation, they're an advanced developer. But you take the A-grade developers today, and it makes them, it 10x's their capabilities, 10x's their output. And so I'm really excited about that. I think it still remains to be seen how and whether the traditional 2D website experience, whether it's B2C, D2C, or B2B, whether that experience survives at all, whether that current experience that runs 98% of the commerce on the internet, it remains to be seen exactly what happens with that traditional point, click, find interface. I think the first step that will go away is that instead of using either category navigation or straight typed search navigation, we'll be having conversations with
You're going to have agents.
They're going to have agents they'll spin up a new agent. It'll have a massive context window of all the previous interactions it's had with us. Every single time we are re-authenticated, it'll pull up that context window. It'll remember when you placed that last order and the conversation you had with it. And it'll be like, oh, how did those shorts work out that we shipped to you a month ago? Did they fit the way that we thought they would fit? Oh, are you going to buy something to go with that? Or it'll be still, unfortunately, and look, I've been using ChatGPT almost since it was released, but it's still very much question answer, right? It is not, the initiation is not happening from the chat side. It is happening from the customer or the guest side. And I think that is going to start to change. That is where it's initiated by the other side, by the machines. That's when we're starting to have some really interesting changes to our industry.
Yeah. This is our industrial revolution, right? AI is our industrial revolution, and it is going to transform the nature of work. One of the most interesting conversations I have with our head of product, who's a head of product and technology, who's a fantastic guy, is really all about the fact that what AI is doing with software engineering in particular is you no longer have to be an expert in syntax. You still have to be an expert in design. You still have to know how to break a problem apart and phrase it in a way that the agentic tools can figure out how to write the software. But you no longer have to be an expert in a particular language. And if you think about how often we hire people, you hire them based upon their proficiency in a specific subset of languages that are the ones that you use in your company. That's no longer needed. Now you just need the very best designer of software, irrespective of the syntax that they have and irrespective of what they knew. So it shifts where the value lies. And I think that's an analog for, I think, how this is going to play out in all the business functions inside of a company and ultimately in an industry at large. It's just going to change where the value creation exists, where the role for the smart people is.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I think what it does is it means that true subject matter experts have more value to the business than ever before, because it means that they don't have to be the people that do the doing, but they have to be able to be the people that get it done. And that's the key for me, is if you can't formulate a prompt because you just don't have enough subject matter expertise to even write the prompt. Now, that there is a flip side of that argument, which is to say that the fact that you have to be an expert prompt engineer to get good results with AI means the AI is not there yet. But I think that we're not far away from where the AI will be able to ask us very smart leading questions that will be able to then solicit the information it needs to get the job done. And I think, but you'll still need subject matter experts that can answer those questions in a meaningful way to get the job done. And I think that's what's being overlooked, is these gray hairs have to count for something, is what I'm trying to say. And so you still have to know what you're talking about to be able to get a good result. I've used this example on the podcast before. I remember back many years ago when Google was still new. Many of my audience are too young to remember when Google was new, but I remember.
I remember.
I remember when it was new too, and I remember when there was the search engine wars, and Google. It wasn't. We were not sure whether Google was going to win that search engine war at the time. But what was super interesting is people that were applying for agency jobs at that point, they would put expert Googler on their CV. And I remember that as a skill, because back then you had to know how to ask great questions to get a good result out of Google. You had to know how to refine your queries. You had to know almost how Google thought to be able to leverage Google in a significant way. It wasn't, people think that the Google of today was how it was when it started. It wasn't that way. And so the reality is you had to be pretty good at formulating your queries to get good information out of Google. And I see that. It would be unthinkable that somebody would put expert Googler on their CV today. But what I do see people putting on their CV today that will go away is expert prompt engineer, expert AI prompt engineer. That is, I see a window of maybe 5 years max where that has value on a CV. And then 5 years from now, it will be just as ridiculous to put that on your CV as you would put expert Googler on your CV, because the AI is going to advance to the point where it can lead with smart questions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Exactly right.
Wow, it's exciting times. Listen, nearly an hour has absolutely flown by. This has been a great conversation. I got an absolutely enlightening conversation, and I got an absolute schooling on what Trevipay is and does, because I was certainly not aware of the depth and breadth of the platform. So I appreciate the education you gave me over this hour. But if people want to get a hold of you and they want to learn more about Trevipay, I'll drop your LinkedIn link in the show notes. I'll drop the Trevipay link in the show notes. But other than that, if people want to talk to you about the platform or all things basically pay to cash, procure to cash, what's the best way to get a hold of you and have those conversations?
Yeah, so we've actually got, I think the website is a really good place to start. We've got a ton of stuff on there, content that is not gated, that is easy for people to get at, where they can go, and we've broken apart this whole process into a series of 2-minute videos so that people can consume it that way. There's white papers if you want to consume it that way. So there's a lot of different ways people can actually get educated on this. And then there's all kinds of contact information in there if they want to reach out and talk more in depth with us. And yeah, please feel free to use my LinkedIn as well. If they want to reach out to me directly, that's also good.
Absolutely love it. I'll make sure and drop that in there. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to turn the microphone over to you to let you ask me one question. Any question can be personal or professional. Mr. Brandon Spear from Trevipay, what is your question for me today?
So with the customers that you are working with today, what is the sort of common thread of the line of questioning that they go down when you're doing some of your consulting work? What's the most, if there's obviously a sample size of a whole variety of different questions, what's the one that's occurring most commonly?
There's probably two. One is the extreme fear that by sales teams that I'm there to help them be replaced by the robots. And so there's resistance, subterfuge, there's crazy things that go on inside these manufacturers and distributors by salespeople that feel threatened, and in some cases, rightly, that their pocket's going to be picked by the machines, by the computers, by automation, by portals. I usually within 10 minutes of me meeting a sales team, I'll come in being the devil and then I'll leave being their best friend, because I still think people play an absolutely mission critical part in these businesses, but I'm all about giving them superpowers, and I'm all about taking away the pain of the admin work that consumes anywhere from 20 to 60% of a sales rep's time that doesn't actually enhance their earnings and it doesn't enhance the customer experience in any way. That's what I'm there to do. I'm there to take away the pain for them and their customers. And then the second thing is adoption planning. How do we, before we even go down the path of scoping a new solution or implementing a new solution, or before we go down the path of spending a dime, how do we make sure we're crafting solutions that customers actually want and need, as opposed to just looking internally and saying, let's create a solution that helps us be more efficient, that makes our teams more happy, et cetera, et cetera. What can we do to virtually guarantee adoption by our customers of any new solution that we build? And oftentimes those conversations haven't been had by the time I get there. And so it oftentimes starts with me facilitating those conversations with customers. And I understand why those conversations don't have in many cases, because, if I'm a customer and I have a working relationship with Bob or Jane, my account manager, and I've been working with them for 20 years, I'm unlikely to tell them all the things I don't like about doing business with them, because I got to then pick up the phone and talk to them the next day. And so by having an impartial third party like me that can come in and facilitate those discussions, I can create an environment where the customer feels safe to say, okay, here's the 1, 2, 3 things I love about doing business with you, but here's the 1, 2, 3 things that are super painful about doing business with you. And if you could fix those things, it would be a no-brainer to do more business with you. And that's the kind of conversations I try to have.
Cool. That's super interesting, man. Thanks. I can see why you're a busy guy.
Thank you. Look, I appreciate that. I love it. I love what I do, and I hope that it shows through in everything, and including in my content. Hopefully my passion comes through loud and clear, because I'm eternally grateful for the lifestyle that this industry has afforded me. A lot of my nearest and dearest friends in this world I met through this industry. So I'm eternally grateful. And I look at the podcast almost as a love letter back to my industry, because I'm just so grateful.
It's been really fun chatting with you, Jason. It's been a real pleasure.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.